I talk about something else in my work I call the female domestic product. I want the money that women control to grow and grow, because in America we get as much freedom and equality as we can pay for.
Right.
So the more we can stop that leakage of our monies into systems that don't support women.
Hello. All right. We are starting the Grant Writing and Funding podcast today with a returning guest. Super excited to have Amy Cross, the founder of Genderfair, back on the podcast. And we will link to the other one, y'all. But I'm just so excited that you're back, because now you also have some research to show about nonprofits and all of the gender kind of data points on that. So we're really excited to have you back on and to be talking about this today and just all the things that you guys are doing with Genderfair. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I love being back.
Yes, yes. And I was so excited when you sent me an email like, hey, Holly, guess what I got?
Guess what I did? Yeah. We talked about it a long time ago, and I actually got it done thanks to this, very fortuitous events, actually.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about, I was like, do you have anything on nonprofits? And that was like a couple of years ago. And you're like, yeah, no, not yet, but that's something we want to delve into. So super excited. You guys also focused on the sector. So can you just remind folks a little bit, what is Genderfair? What got you guys started to focus on, and then why you also are now focusing on nonprofits?
Sure. Genderfair is the first rating system for gender equality. So our goal is to show people how organizations and companies perform on gender, because we have a lot of economic power. We have money that we spend on tuition or consumer goods or nonprofits or investments or college tuitions, but we don't really ask for much in return. Even as a business owner, do you ask your vendors if they're doing well on gender? Like, if you're using Zoom, do you know how well Zoom does for women? So our whole goal is to let people ask the question, how well do you perform for women before I give you my money? That's our overarching goal. And then if we want to have people not use companies or donate to organizations that don't support women's equality, which will make all organizations do better. And did we talk last time about the Human Rights Campaign? What, that great nonprofit?
I don't think we did.
Yeah. Okay. So this is called the Human Rights Campaign, based in DC, of course, and it's the LGBTQ sort of lobby group, and they created the Marriage Equality Campaign, which is wonderful. But even before that, maybe 15 years ago, they started something called the Guide to Corporate Equality, and they decided to measure companies on their LGBTQ policies. And it has transformed the workplace. So when I heard about this, I thought, well, why can't women do the same thing? And like, why is there no Marine Steward certified or Rainforest Alliance certified products for women? Like, how come there's a frog and a rainforest and a tree and a fish, but not a woman in any package? So that's the idea behind it. So what the Human Rights Campaign done is extraordinary. They've changed policies in 1,500 companies. 800 now get a perfect score, and all the ones that do will put that on their website very clearly. But there's not an analog for women's equality. So it's sort of sad to me that 50% of the population can't do what much smaller but important part of the population could do. So that's our ultimate goal, is to make women realize we have all this power and we should not give up our money power. Not we should, but we don't have to give up our money or power to organizations and companies that don't serve us well. So that's really a very simple message, but I hope I can get it through to people. Do you think it's an understandable message? I think people
Absolutely.
can catch that.
Yeah, and I think that even more and more we're seeing this, especially with millennials, especially with Gen Z, and they're really, I think, advocating for this way of thinking. It's almost like this paradigm shift as far as like, well, what I want to do in my life, not just a job, but does that job have meaning? If I buy something at the store, does it have a story? Is it, what I mean, contributing to, something negative or something positive? So I think, especially the younger generations, and now I think us old too, like, we understand it too in a different way, but it's catching up more into that mainstream conversation and just the thought, like you're saying, it's also like this thought when you're making a purchase, like, does that even register? Is there awareness there? And I think the more work that people like you are doing are bringing that awareness up just into our economic decisions, which I think is really important, because that's where a lot of the power is, like you're saying. So yeah, I think there is definitely a
They talk
trend.
about the customer being king, and I'd say she's also a queen. The customer is a queen, and she has the right to demand things and say off with their heads if she doesn't like it. That's what I hope to say. But I think even in my own life, I'm not sure that I even I could even internalize this message that I deserve fairness all the time. I've been an ethical shopper my whole life. I went to women's college. Had I gone to a co-ed college, would I have asked a lot of questions about, would you have this for women? I don't think I would have, actually. So I think it's an idea that you have to sort of grow with, and it doesn't
Yeah.
come naturally, especially because women are
No,
used to getting the shorter end of the stick.
absolutely. But I do think there's like more and more of this coming into the conversation that causing some of the awareness. So
I
hopefully,
hope so. I
yeah,
hope
I
so.
hope so. And I do think I'm seeing that more and more, like even with my daughter at her school, like these conversations are being had, and I think it's really good. And I think a part of that is marketing. There are more companies out there that are marketing this message, right? Like this goes to help, if you buy this product, like Tom's, you get one for whatever to help out, like there are more and more messages that are becoming a little bit more mainstream, and they're using that, marketers are using that. So I do appreciate that. Is it being greenwashed? Is it being this washed? Is it being that? I'm not sure to all the extent. And that's why there's folks like you that can actually measure behind the scenes. So it doesn't
Right.
just become a marketing kind of wash as well, right? Which we have to watch out for.
And that does happen, and it happens all over.
Yeah.
Just look at any
Yeah.
sort of, even nonprofits, they probably put women and people of color on their websites. Whereas if you look at their, do they actually publish there? Do they share their diversity data on Candid? The great organization Candid has a place where they do ask nonprofits to register their diversity data, and a very, very, very small percentage of organizations bother to do that, and that's kind of sad. And we track that. So yeah, we just have to keep on asking the questions and demanding, and realize that we have this power in the aggregate, right?
Yeah.
In the aggregate, we have that power. We may not want, Amy Cross or Holly Rustick just by ourselves, maybe not. But if Amy and all her friends and Holly and all her friends start noticing which companies and nonprofits aren't serving women well,
Yeah.
that will certainly help.
Yeah. And I love that. So yeah, y'all started with like looking at businesses, measuring businesses, and that's very important. And then you even moved into government. So I know you were doing some work with governments as well, and looking at what is the what are gender questions here, or representation, leadership, pay, all of that, right? Looking at different components. And then you moved into the nonprofit space too, because that's also very important, right? To see like, what is the gender representation? What were some of the data
Right.
points that you were looking at within nonprofits specifically?
Right. Well, we know in aggregate, we know overall that women get, the data is very clear. It's been around for years and years and years, that in the larger revenue nonprofits, men tend to be the leadership at the top and take these massive salaries. And women are at the top of the smaller revenue nonprofits.
Yeah.
And this happens over and over again. So we know this,
Yeah.
and what can we do about it? So what we did is that we gathered data on 22,000 nonprofits. And we have
Wow.
individual ratings on each of those. Now, this is not as complex. When we do the consumer ratings, we have a much fuller set of metrics. We look at leadership, employee policies, diversity reporting, advertising, and social impact. For colleges, because of the database, we used computer science, a group of computer scientists at a university. They did this work for us, a massive pro bono present. And they spent all year doing it, and they were able to scrape IRS 990 data. I imagine all your listeners know what that is. I mean, I love it. I have a meeting tomorrow with a very important foundation, and I just look up their 990 to see, who's paid what and what their expenses are. It's very interesting. So we have the info on 22,000 nonprofits, and it's all scraped data. So normally our database, we collect the research manually. We do data journalism. We have our journalists go and look in the public record and SEC reports or CSR reports, and they collect the data and do the reporting. But we couldn't do that with a nonprofit. That would just mean a very small database. And plus, the people who would volunteer to do this were computer scientists, so they use their computers and a little bit of AI, and they were wonderful. And so 22,000 nonprofits that we collected data on, information that's in the 990s, like the board and the top executives. And we also were able to report on pay disparity between the top wage, the salary of the top paid employee. And then because the IRS data will say the total paid in salaries, and you divide that by the number of employees, we did the average, average or median salary per employee. And we could show the disparity between that. And you can see it graphically on the website. It's like one big circle for the CEO and the average employee. Like the CEO is 328K and the average employee is 50K. And that's a women's organization I'm looking at, actually. So, I
Mhm.
mean, that inequality is so baked into our culture at the moment. We've hoped we can move away from that. I mean, that's only 6x in
Mhm.
corporate terms. I mean, there's a story in the New York Times the other day. It was like in corporate terms, and that was like 6,000x or
Wow.
300x the average employees. It's very wrong. Anyway,
Mhm.
so we have data on the gender divisions and several levels of the company. We have pay data. And then we also do a little bit of reporting on diversity. If the nonprofit did report their diversity data to Candid.
Okay. And yeah, and I love the website. It's very visual, like you mentioned. When you go there, there's graphs and everything, so you can clearly see the data. So it's really well done. And
Yeah.
I love that you're collecting all of this. And overall, too, you're able to see, yes, there is disparity. And would you say the main disparity, were you also looking at, I think we had talked about before about looking at like maternity policy, looking at some other fringe benefits. Were
No,
you guys, that's
we weren't able to do
hard.
that. Sadly,
Yeah.
we weren't. And I
Yeah.
was really hoping to. I tried to, again, we can't, I'm sure the people in the nonprofit listeners will understand when you do something with no, like we work on a shoestring that I'd say is like so thin, it's like fishing wire. So
Mhm.
this was a pro bono project.
Yeah.
If you could, it would take, I don't know how many hours it would take, 20,000 hours to collect that data.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there are some places that have that data, some databases that do like employee reporting websites, and none of them would share the data with us, which is
Oof.
too bad. I could actually, you know
Yeah.
what I could do in future, what I could, I wonder if I could do this, we could automatically link to sort of like an Indeed or a Glassdoor. None of those groups or the Muse Fairy God Boss, none of them would agree to share the data on that, which would have been very useful. I'm sad that we couldn't rate them on that, but better half of something
Yeah.
than not
Yeah.
doing it at
No,
all.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what you said is like a lot of the data that you're finding was representative of kind of like this general data. Because even I've seen that data
Mhm.
before where it's like over, I think it's once they get to over $1 million a year, is that where we see the real jump in representation of gender? We see way fewer women sitting as CEO or ED on
Right.
boards, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of
Exactly.
like,
So, that's something we'll maybe do over the summer. And maybe your listeners have questions they want to know.
yeah.
We'd be happy to have like their data scientists crunch things. Like if we can separate them, we could actually maybe even do a separate list of the top revenue nonprofit orgs that are run by women. Like that would
Yeah.
be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then also sometimes organizations and companies will put a woman at the top and then the next layer is all men.
Yeah.
So it's really, we want to see gender balance throughout an organization, gender and racial balance throughout an organization. That's what's really important. But if you put someone in the figurehead and the rest of the ship, the bowsprit may look like a woman, but everyone in the galley everyone rowing the boat
Yes.
is a man.
Yeah.
We see that
Yeah.
happening, but yeah,
Hmm. And yeah,
I'd like to see that.
yeah. And I love that you guys are also looking at racial. And I know your main focus is gender, but bringing in that racial awareness too, because
Yeah.
that's so important.
Always
Yeah.
a key.
Yeah.
Always, I mean, you can't really look at equality. I mean, women's equality is not just white women's equality has to be as intersectional as possible. And the
Yeah.
problem is, they don't have to report this. There's a petition going around this year by called WLNI. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a women in Philadelphia that have petitioned the IRS to make disclosure of race or maybe it was gender required on 990 forms. I think we were able to get gender by sort of AI gender matching name databases, but there's no reason why these nonprofits shouldn't have to report on this. Just like, do you know what EO1 reports are for the corporate sector?
No.
No. So any company that has over 100 employees since the 1970s has been required to report the diversity of their employees
Oh,
to the
nice.
federal government. And
Hmm.
yet they're not required to share it with anyone. And
Oh,
but recently there's been a lot of shareholder pressure to do this because this is if we're trying to create fairness through American culture, we have to do it through employers, the major employers. So there's been a lot of shareholder actions towards this, and they've been successful. So I think in our database now, in our consumer database, we
mhm.
now track. We should just track whether a company does diversity reporting, just like the diversity reporting that nonprofits can choose to do with Candid. So we used to track whether a company would share the diversity of their employees in their regular sort of reports.
Mhm.
And now we ask, do they share their EO1 data? Because that's much more significant. It's broken down into like, Latina women managers, Latina women professionals, Latina women
nice.
technical roles. So it's very intersectional, very granular. And we actually separated that we'll be able to report on about maybe 100 or so companies and their exact sectional data and how it matches the population. So that'll be coming out this summer too.
Oh, I love that.
That's an actual companies you'll able to see like
Yeah.
this company has a fair representation of women of color across the board.
I love that. And that's so great. And you guys also have your app. So just all the listeners out there, where if you are looking at like, do I want to, so just from the consumer side, buy something or buy this product or whatever from this place, you can go onto your app and you can find out these ratings, which is great. So exactly, are you supporting a business?
Definitely should go on the app. It's totally new. We revised it recently. We updated the data, and there's a new thing where you should be able to scan the logo to get the company's score to come up, and now you can scan a barcode, and it will tell you can have a shopping list in the app, and so you can scan something you use, and if it's not Genderfair, it'll say, oh, this is a misogyny shampoo, and then why don't you try this one instead? Try this L'Oreal one. And so that's pretty easy. Please download the app. And there's a paid version of it too, actually, where you get really good data. You get like a nutrition label. But even if I can't get people to download the app, I want to just realize this and ask these questions and sort of think about it.
Yeah.
And but yeah, download the app.
Download the app.
Genderfair, it's called.
It's so
on
good.
The app. It's on iOS and Android. And yeah, and we have some good fans. One of our biggest fans is Melinda Gates. Actually, she wrote about us in her book, which that made me so happy because she's the patron saint of gender equality. And in her book called The Moment of Lift from a few years ago, she had listed 6 things that could move the needle for gender equality, and shopping Genderfair was one of them. So I was thrilled to think that if I can only get millions of women to follow her advice and can fix this workplace thing in no time at all.
Oh yeah, I love that. I love that so much. And even people, a lot of women now are looking at like, what is my 401k? What is it made up of? What are my investments? Are they supporting these businesses? So it's even breaking,
huge.
Down those things, saying, oh, I have a choice. I can move these things around if I want to. Like, I'm the owner of this.
And actually, what's interesting is that you think of, I'm afraid to say women's colleges. I'm a graduate of women's college. They don't put a gender lens unless something's happened in the last year or so on their investments. And people in the gender lens movement have been trying to get these colleges to do that. And what about, women's nonprofits? Like, why wouldn't they all be banking at the Women's Bank of Chicago? I talk about something else in my work I call the female domestic product. I want the money that women control to grow and grow, because in America we get as much freedom and equality as we can pay for.
Right.
So the more we can stop that leakage of our monies into systems that don't support women. I guess that came from a segue. I think about the nurses and teachers. Think about how much money they control.
Yes.
They have massive amounts of money in their pensions. And I love that you know about the gender lens investing. If they put a gender lens on nurses' pensions, that would be huge. People might take more notice,
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, then there's more power, right, to change things. So things will be changed organically if we're investing into women fair, gender fair, right, race fair, organizations and companies. Like it will change. So I love that there's hope.
Yeah, there's hope. And the Genderfair app, one thing we measure, we can stop a little trickle of money out of the regular economy into the FDP, because we measure whether a company donates to women's nonprofits. Now, this is hugely important for us as a metric, because you probably know this we used to be 1.8% of donations went to women's or girls organizations, and now it's 1.5 is the last I read.
Oh, wow.
So it's going down, pets get more money. So in my mind, it's very important. If you're a male-owned company like Monster Beverage, maybe you don't really have to donate to women, but any other organization that's selling half of its stuff to women, I think like you to do something for the community of women. So that's a 10% of our score, and we ask whether a company not only donates to a women or girls organization, is it national, ongoing, and do they report on the amount they give? Because it could be, we give to Dress for Success, it could be $5,000, it could be $100,000, but we want to encourage more and more transparency, so we measure that. And another way we measure whether money leaks out of companies is we measure whether they spend on women-owned businesses. I bet you do this in your own business, Holly. I bet you look for women-owned businesses locally that you can support. from
Oh,
what I
yeah.
know about you, right?
Yeah. We tap into our Women's
Yeah, so
Chamber of
that's an important thing
Commerce.
to measure.
Yeah.
Great.
And then so if I'm going to procure a service, like a lawyer, a bookkeeper, whatever, I go there first and look at women-owned businesses in my network.
Do
So,
you? Oh,
yeah.
that's good. I usually Google, I don't have that, but so I will just Google, women-owned restaurant near me or women-owned hotel. It's very hard to find, like, and so
Yeah.
many things when you think of all the money we spend all day. But anyway, that's another way that nonprofits, now this, what I would have loved to have this in the database. I would love to measure whether nonprofits make an effort to spend with diverse owned suppliers. That's another way not all social change is by donation, but by transfer of flow of capital. So the more we
Right.
can flow capital out of these majority white male owned organizations into women and minority owned companies,
Mhm.
the better we can do. So um, I don't know. It's sad that that's not part of our measurement, but I really wish it could have been. Well, hopefully if I get to talk to more nonprofits in this work, I'll say this is something you need to add.
Yes.
Add a
Yes.
supplier diversity program. Connect with your Women's
For
Chamber of
sure.
Commerce, your Gay Chamber of Commerce, your Black Chamber of Commerce locally.
Yep. I love that. I think it's so important. And I know you guys do that on the business side when you do ratings, is you do ask questions about procurement, which is so important. And like, what types of businesses are they getting their supplies from and all of the things, right? So,
Right.
and are they looking at that? And I think that's so important, even with nonprofits, like you can have that because a lot of times when you're building out budget, say in a grant, right? And you have to show 3 quotes. So sometimes even you don't have to always say the lowest quote for something you're going to procure. You could say, even if say if it's a male-owned business, white male-owned business, it's the cheapest
Right.
one. You don't have to take that because you could say, according to our values, we support women. So we're actually going to take this quote, which is maybe number 2, right? And we're going to take this one
Oh, that's cool.
because it aligns with our values and our mission because it's a women-owned business as well. So you don't have to do the race to the bottom for those types of things. You can tell the funding source like why you're selecting a certain procurement because it aligns with your values, and you'll be fine. Like that'll be like, oh, okay. So it's not
Oh,
something
really?
like,
That's great.
yeah.
Do a lot of people have that practice? Is
Yeah,
that
I mean,
common
it's one I would
practice?
like more people to have. Sometimes they think I have to take the bottom number because it's the cheapest and I have to present it to the funding source. And I'm always combating them to say, it doesn't have to be that way if it doesn't align that with with something. So even like in Guam, sometimes we won't take the cheapest cost because it won't get to it. The shipping, it won't be as fast. Maybe we do pay more because we need speed of market on some kind of supply, right? But you could have that conversation just with who the procurement is as well. Like that's a woman-owned business. Sometimes we do that too. This is a local business that we want to support locally. So it'll help our
That's cool.
economy. So we can do that. And I have seen nonprofits do that. But I'd like to see it more to say, hey, you guys have an opportunity. It doesn't have to be a race to the bottom.
That's right.
With your budget.
Every dollar you spend can be a vote for how you want the world to be. So
Exactly. And even in
I'm glad.
salaries, right? Even in salaries. So we could talk about that for a minute with grants.
Yeah.
So it's also sometimes people think the less I pay, the more competitive I will be to get the grant because it'll look like I'm quote unquote saving money or being scrappy. And I'll get like brownie points for that. And that is completely opposite, actually. Funding sources do not like that. And especially more and more people who think peer reviewers, there are people out there that are in the social environment that we're in now, they also don't want to see that. They're going to look at that and be like, how can even someone make a living on that wage? How can somebody do that job? Like they're having the same questions. So racing to the bottom with personnel costs is not going to get you brownie points. It's actually going to backfire. You do want to put wages in. You do want to put fringe benefits in and say this will actually help retain these staff members, etc. So it is important to also just say if you do want to have staff members, you don't have to pay them just pennies to keep them. You can put good wages into budgets for grants and justify it with retention.
That's cool. Do nonprofits measure their engagement and retention? Is that a common thing to do and report on?
I would say nonprofits that are smaller probably don't because they just have not had the training to do that. Many
Right.
nonprofits, right? I would say larger nonprofits probably do, just because there's more training and there's more reporting. And it also depends on who you're getting grant funding for, as far as what the requirements are asking for. And I think the more funders that request that from the grant reports, then nonprofits are going to align, right? They are going to give those types of feedback, and because they have to like give a report anyways at the end of their cycle of a grant. So you could ask specific questions. So this could also be for those.
Because I've seen that in nonprofits.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've seen that in nonprofits, that one in our town that is cycling through people because of bad management.
High
And
turnover at nonprofits, high.
so, but the one that didn't have one that was paying people well and giving them good benefits would have less turnover. So that, and they would hopefully measure that and report that to their funders.
Yeah, and then they save so much money because hiring people is expensive.
Of course.
There's so much, not just in the putting applications out or whatever, or doing interviews, but it's just the time that you don't have somebody in that space doing that work. That's a lot of loss of serving people. It's a loss of outcome. It's a loss of revenue, right? So keeping people is, even if you're paying more or whatever, like it makes sense. It makes sense financially and for your
Absolutely.
mission.
In every
Mhm.
field. So I'm glad there's some reporting on that. People will look into that because that does show a lot about how well it's run. I
Mhm.
can't, again, I couldn't show what the benefits are because we couldn't
Yeah.
collect that data, but
Yeah, and it's, oof, that would be, yeah, but I think what you guys are reporting on too, it's really good. So y'all go over there, check it out. We'll have the link in the show notes. Look at what the data is showing. So we're looking at representation, just like where that lines up. We're looking at pay. And then you're able to list out a rating or a ranking of where the nonprofit
right.
kind of lays with the data points that you collected. Will people be on there and be like, oh, my nonprofit might be on there, like, and then to see
Oh, they
what
will. And there's actually a link to donate. And there's some cool movable things. There's some little graphics, like there's a pie chart, and it was like one is, I forget what it is, it's board versus, yeah, it says board, senior staff, or total staff. If the organization reports, you can see how that measures up. You can see the pie chart move. So
I love
that's
that.
cool. And then it shows the score. And then there's a link back to every organization.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's this one board there's one board here that's the data is very, very strong. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's, and yeah, and maybe if you do work with a nonprofit already, and check to see if you're in the database, and if you have any problems with it, or you think it's, I'd love to hear. You
Yeah,
can email me at amy.cross@genderfair.com. You know,
I
because some
love
of the
it.
numbers are some of the numbers that say that women are paid more, like 100% more than men. That looks good. Sometimes they're paid less, even on a women's organization. So it's I wonder how people. I'm curious to see how people react to the data and the ratings, and hopefully
Yeah,
hopefully they're useful, and they show people, well, this is doing, any organization above 70 is sort of doing okay, and if you're
yeah.
below 70, then I'd be worried.
Okay, that's
But
good to know.
not
Do
worried,
you?
but below 70 means you're not doing it. You're not.
Yeah, you gotta work on some things. So, yeah, definitely. But and also this is a great place for donors. So if you're looking at donating to a nonprofit, this is a great place to go and look at that data too. To say, okay, I want to invest more in, women fair, gender fair, and race fair, right? Like racial fair organizations that are doing the work too. So this is a great place. So even if nonprofits aren't necessarily, like, say gender equality isn't their mission, it's not their cause, that's okay. You're not just measuring that, you're measuring the organization of how it's built up, right? So just to kind of
That's right.
clarify.
And I mean, there's a big movement in the environmental movement saying that, we can't leave women outside. If this is the biggest crisis facing the entire planet, like every single country, we can't leave women out of the solutions for, well, basically we should leave them out of any solution, especially the planet. So, but I checked tonight, I did a filter. You could filter also in the database by certain categories, like children, arts, environment, community. And so I did a filter on environment, and I was pleased to see that a lot of the environmental groups had pretty high ratings. They weren't like in the 40s. It took me several pages of 70 plus. So that's good. To me, that's really good news, even though I know it's a stated problem in the environmental movement that there needs to be more female leadership, but
Yeah.
it didn't look so bad. It didn't look so bad.
Right.
And then also donors can see whether these organizations are reporting on diversity, because if the organization, didn't report on diversity to Candid, where we got our data, That's a red flag to me. Like, why aren't you reporting on your diversity? You're not forced to, but if we're going to give you a check, either at me, Amy Cross, or the Amy Cross Foundation, if I were to give an organization a check, I would really want to know that why wouldn't they be tracking their diversity? Even if it's not good, just track it and try to get better. Share the data. Transparency creates fairness.
Yeah, and I think that's I'm not sure, but I think that might be a newer thing Candid is asking for, but it would be great if that would be a requirement too, to have involved.
But there's a lot of pushback. Our culture doesn't really want to, get on the scale. I sometimes compare it to getting on the scale at a Weight Watchers meeting. It's like, it's very hard to make, most of our culture isn't fair, woman fair, gender fair, race fair. Humans are very hesitant to share the data if they aren't going to get an A. Probably in my own household, there's not an A. It's like very hard. We know this is a cultural, societal problem, and we can't be afraid of getting our scores or checking ourselves. That's the only way we're going to get better. So I hope that more will start sharing their data, and Candid won't force them to do it. I don't think. Only the good ones are playing.
Yeah. No, I actually did a webinar with them before with Candid. It was about it was actually about, because they were interested in bringing this topic up, and it was about the gender disparity in nonprofits. And when I remember we were hosting it on the back end, she goes, "We've never gotten like pushback and questions and just like angry emails about any webinar." And she's like, "And for some reason yours is getting all kinds." And we're just talking about we're just looking at stats and data. I mean, it wasn't even, you know what I mean? It wasn't even like, oh, like I was bringing in all this stuff. It was just like, let's look at some stats and data and look at gender representation in nonprofits. And it was like so much pushback. So it's so interesting it was so interesting to us, but you know what I mean? To look at that and say, why is there so much emotion tied with this from folks? And I think maybe that's what you're saying, like, oh, if we're not going to get an A, then, oh my gosh, like trying to justify something. It was just weird. It was very weird.
Then the grading curve is wrong. So was it your audience that gave pushback, or Candid?
No, Candid
following that gave pushback.
Candid. Yeah, it was Candid. Yeah, it was really interesting. My audience, they know what we stand for.
Your podcast was posted to the Candid audience. And
no, I did like a public webinar for them. Yeah, it was a webinar.
Oh, for them. Okay.
Yeah, for them.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because
their people didn't want to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, I'm gonna go. Oh, I guess is that record? I want to listen to that. That sounds good.
Yeah,
and I'll write a nice note. Holly was amazing. I learned so much.
The call was fine. We didn't, but it was before, when they were just marketing it, they got so many emails and just weird stuff. And she was sharing it with me. She was like, I'm going to be really guarding the chat just to make sure there's nothing strange. You know what I mean? Just because it was such a weird pushback. And it went fine though, I'm just sharing data. But it was funny. So weird.
You weren't saying women have to take over all nonprofits, all money to women. You weren't saying
I was it was just so bizarre. So
I don't know why. What they please have 2.5% of the money. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. Okay, well, it shows how heated the issue is. Then that's very interesting.
It is, and especially with nonprofits, I didn't think it would be so much. And I think there's a part of nonprofits that are but we're so women, we have so many women in the nonprofit space, which is true. But the thing is so what was some of the information? Can you just give a general kind of takeaways? Do you have some of the general takeaways? You did mention, there's different type of pay at leadership at different annual operating budgets, because there are a lot of women. Is that what you were seeing in this? There's a lot of women in this
space. I mean, I think it's known across the sector that women are stuck in the lower levels of jobs. This is true in corporations too. So they'll say, oh, someone will tell me, oh, my company is all women. I'm like, well, yeah, you're the owner, you're a man, and you make all the money. So this isn't very interesting. It's we want not just about money, but it's about money and power and ability to control an organization or a company. So it's very germane to see where the leadership is and where whose voices are being heard. I think that's important, because we know burnout happens when people don't have the power to change what they want to change, and it's not just about being tired; it's about being frustrated. And oh wait, I have a great PSA for your audience. Ooh. If your audience works in the social good space, right, where it can be very daunting, and the news is sad, and and you feel like you don't make progress, but there's a new musical in New York called Suffs. And the
Ooh,
last song I listened to, I play it sometimes before I go to work for the day, because it's sometimes working in gender equality makes me, is difficult because the
yeah.
progress is so slow. But one of the songs is called Keep Marching. And one of the lines is, progress is possible, but not guaranteed. And
Oh,
that just is such a great line. It gives me hope every day. We have to, even though I'm not going to see the thing I really want to see probably in my lifetime.
mhm.
Even if I just help people inch to it incrementally, I have to hope that makes me happy in some ways. But
Yeah.
anyway, yes, let's put that song in the show notes
Let's do
too.
it. Let's do it.
Keep marching, women and people of color in the nonprofit sector, to know that people are measuring. We want to create fairness in this industry, and the funders are asking these questions too. So
Yeah.
hopefully I should maybe get this to some of the big funders and show
Yeah.
them how their orgs are doing.
I love
Um,
this so much. I love that you guys have done this. And even like, there's Charity Navigator out there, there's some other places, but they're not measuring gender, they're not measuring a lot of representation, they're not measuring a lot of, they're kind of measuring leadership and other types of things, but not really demographic breakdown so much in this type of work. So I think this is a missing void that you guys have, or it's a huge gap that you guys have been able to fill.
but so why wouldn't they? They
I
can
don't
get the
know.
IRS data as well, right?
Yeah.
And they could
It just
afford,
wasn't
I mean,
something that they had done so far. Yeah, it's just like,
because
wasn't something thought of.
but is it
Yeah.
because women and people of color are not women? Like Candid has done the diversity reporting, and they've opened the
Mhm.
portal to report it. But does that mean that gender doesn't matter? Like women don't matter?
I know. Yeah.
Is that what it says? Like, so they track all these things in nonprofits, but not
Yeah.
fairness or women's equality. That's kind
Yeah.
of shocking. They could easily do it, and they choose not to.
Yeah.
They choose not to. That's quite shocking, actually.
Mhm. So I think, yeah, I mean, if you guys are all
Or
looking
maybe
at,
they thought it was impossible.
yeah, I had a conversation. They're like, oh, we never thought of that. It was like more of like, yeah. Oh, so yeah, it was an interesting, oh, we should probably add that on our thing. Yeah. So,
And would they have to be opt-in, or would they have to, I don't know. That is kind of shocking, actually, when that was just not even considered important, where
mhm.
the rest of the world is doing it. And the
Yeah.
I guess because the nonprofit sector might say, well, we have lots of women, but don't want to get
It's,
granular.
Yep, it's kind of like this preconceived notion of like, oh yeah, but nonprofits, women run those, so it must be fine. Just like I think when I first found out about you, it was through a conversation where you were talking to with Save the Children. And it was the same thing, like you would think they would have like this amazing score and all the things, but they didn't, but they actually were transparent about it. And they talk about it on that webinar. And then they said, then they addressed things because it was
And
just like,
amazing, amazing.
yeah,
I remember that story. They talked about how they were founded by a woman, and
yeah.
yet at the same, and that's not enough. That's not enough to bring fairness all throughout, to weave fairness throughout. So that just shows us how culturally we're kept, we reify these things that we're sort of used to. So the fact that a women-owned organization, women-led organization wouldn't have fixed a lot of these problems 70 years ago when it started, whatever. It shows us how hard it is for all of us to be fair.
Yes.
It's a daily practice to try to be fair and try to include everyone. And yeah, so that was actually a huge eye opener to me,
Yeah.
that remark we learned that day. Yeah, that was huge.
Yeah. I was like, wow. And then, but they were actually saying, but we've taken the Genderfair report, we get the feedback, we can know what to address and what to work on, and we're working towards that, and we're doing these things, and now we have a really good score or whatever. So it was like, it was so interesting to be like, wow, that's even that, like, it is such a cultural thing. I mean, even in my business, like, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to hire somebody, I'm getting a new person to work on my website, it's a woman of color, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's important to me to like do that kind of thought process behind it. Right. So it's really, and even like my co-coaches and like all of the things in my business, like I have to think about who wants to come into my programs, make sure that they feel represented and that there is a different point of view too than mine, right, as well. So it's so important, I think, for us all as business owners too, and freelance grant writers, you're a business owner, right? To be
Right.
able to make those decisions in your business too on who you want to work with. Just because there's a lot of male coaches out there, you don't have to go with a male coach. You can find a woman coach. You can find a woman of color coach, right? Those types of things. So really important. to do that.
Very important. And that's something you can control. You
Yes.
can't necessarily control everything externally, but you control with whom you choose to work and where you choose to spend your money or
Yeah.
donate. But
Yes. Or donate.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this you're done. I don't for your audience. I'm hoping that the database can be interesting for them to see which organizations they might want to, help write grants for, and then help them write grants to get better, to get better on
Exactly.
gender diversity and pay. Yeah, it's like we see you have
I
a
love
problem
that.
and we can help.
And that was even a good part. I know some of the freelance grant writers, they like to do a vetting too, where they'll look some of the things like the 990s and stuff at nonprofits before they even sign a contract with them, and to make sure they're a good fit, because a lot of these times they're getting into a year-long retainer with them, right? They're going to be writing grants, they're going to be getting monies for them, and they want to make sure it aligns with the causes they believe in. So this is a great resource to go over to Genderfair, see if that nonprofit's on there before you say yes to a contract, and to see what that looks like. And just because they're not there doesn't mean like, it just might be because they're not there, right? But there's quite a few on there now. So, and will you guys continue to add to that?
There are millions, there are hundreds of thousands of nonprofits. So it's not really worth rating one that has 10 employees. I think we had a certain, I forgot the cutoff of revenue. There was a cutoff of revenue below which we didn't rate. It's just be so massive. And you can just go and check your 990. I don't know. Yeah, we just thought it was just too much. Then you have to, imagine how expensive it is to host a database of what is it, 1 million nonprofits? And
There's like
them are
1.4 million or something like that. Yeah, it's a lot, but a lot of those are like, they're not active and all of the things. So I like that you're having a certain, like, it's broader than a sample size for sure. Like, it's a certain demographic, it's a certain snapshot of data that you're getting. So that's good to know too. Like, okay, if they're at this amount, this is what you're looking at. And
that's right. I'll have to look that up. I'm embarrassed that I forgot. It was maybe, some amount of millions. I know it wasn't like $20,000. And maybe in one day, I tried to actually see if people would report on their own nonprofits with the policies, but I didn't get anyone to engage with that, because I created a form so people could have just, so we have mat leave. It's how many weeks it is, but the Taylor Swift of nonprofits just credit to her audience for it to get around that much.
Yeah. And that's something, there's a call out there. If y'all researchers or something, that would be a great research project to do, is to like dive down even more and talk to Amy about that. Yeah. So that would be fantastic. But I love that you've started with this. It's a huge effort. And it's really giving us a lot of data that's so important to have. So thank you so much. Thanks for you're like, oh yeah, I'll do nonprofits. And then like you did. So
I know, I'm so lucky. And you want to hear the story, how it came about?
Yeah.
Because originally I was going to try to, get some money so I could hire researchers, because it's expensive to do our research. Yeah. And I was invited to this thing called Renaissance Weekend. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Sort of like TED, except everyone gives a lecture. Everyone's considered an expert, and you share your knowledge. It's really wonderful. So I was there, and I met this incredible computer scientist, sort of my age, who was early on in the field, back when there were more women, and she loved what I was doing. And she said, you should meet this technical university in the Midwest. They love doing projects. And so this university did the project all year and produced this database. And now, and later on, they're going to redo my college database, which was originally done by student researchers manually, but now we're going to it won't be as detailed as our first database, but it'll combine two federal databases, one of the 990s, and then the IPEDS data on educational diversity. Anyway, so the lesson of that is, when you get invited somewhere to a great conference where you meet cool people, just go, because I met great people and this just magic thing happened.
Love it. Wonderful. Oh, I love that so much. Gift. So cool. All right. So if people are looking for the database, can you just give the URL? We'll go ahead and we'll link it as well.
Shoure. Genderfair-nonprofits.org. Or I think you can also get there, I think, from the main page too, but Genderfair Nonprofits should bring you to it right away. And I encourage all your listeners to check out the rating of any nonprofit they like or they work, and they feel, and see if they feel that's a fair rating. Like I'm surprised that some of the women's organizations aren't 100%. So I think maybe I'll send to a few of the women's organizations I know and say, why do you think this is you're not tippy tops? But I don't know. That's how we did it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm so happy that you are there for your audience, and helping everyone learn about their field and get better and help all their the nonprofits do better. And I hope they all follow your example and look for women vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Amy. This is so good. Always come back on the show when you guys got something going on, because we love supporting the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. And everyone can find all the information in the show notes. So we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.